People often ask me why I came to Panama. And I have a whole series of reasons I talk about at the website. But I'd like to talk about something a little more general today. Whether you choose Panama or another country, something that's drawn from my own experience. In 1967, when I was the ripe old age of 22, I set off as a Peace Corps volunteer to the Philippines. And for the 43 years since then, with the exception of 2 or 3, I've spent all of my professional life working all over the world. In 1995, I happened to have all my old passports together in one location and went through and counted the countries I'd visited, worked in, lived in, and there were 36. I was quite surprised. I'd forgotten a couple that I'd even been there. Since then, I've added a whole bunch more. So I don't know how many countries. I don't care anymore. I no longer worry about things like that. But maybe it's 45, 50, something along those lines. I did most of my work in nutrition and agriculture, but all of it was in economic development. I worked for the United Nations, various agencies. I worked for the U.S. Foreign Aid Program. I worked for a whole variety of nonprofit humanitarian agencies, and I've worked for business firms. Most of my work was directly associated with economic development. In fact, all of it was in one form or another. I would work in one country 1 year, and then 3 years later I'd come back to do another job. And I often found that a country had made no progress. Some of them had slid back. Some had made a little progress. Some made a fair amount of progress over time. And like so many people in my background, especially since economic development is our professional field, we'd like to know why it is that in some countries it seems to take, in other countries it does not. What differentiates these two groups of nations? And my determination after all these years is really a fairly simple one. And it's fairly easy to test. If you talk to enough people in a country, not just one or two, but to a variety of them, and you ask them, tell me something about Panama or your country, whatever country it might be. One group is going to talk to you about past glories that are no longer the case. Their wonderful history of what they were like in 500 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Others will talk about some horrible war that was lost, a battle that was lost, or something terrible that happened in the past that they feel has made their lives miserable ever since. Some of these events are 1,000 years ago. It's astonishing to hear people talk about them. Others maybe 30 or 40 years ago. The critical issue, though, is that these folks invariably, when they have a general topic to discuss regarding their countries, they focus on the past. Whether it was a beautiful, wonderful past or a horrible, tragic past, it's the past. In another set of countries, when I ask the same question, people will talk about how things are today, what they're doing now, but especially about the future, what they're planning to do, or what they're looking forward to. Now, if I ask them about their past, they'll talk about it, just as they will in Panama. And in the other countries, if I ask about their future, they'll talk about it, even though they're not very positive about it most of the time. But the critical thing is that left to their own devices, one group chooses to talk about the past, and the other group chooses to focus on the future. Do I need to tell you which group, in my experience over 43 years, has made the real progress? Well, if you haven't figured that out, it's the group that are focused on the future. If you think you've got a future, or your country's got a future, you're feeling positive, you're moving forward, you get things done, and you're willing to try new things and look at other possibilities and alternatives, and you're flexible and you work around things. If you're buried in the past and all you can do is sit there and complain about something that happened that you had no control over, that was 5 generations or 500 generations ago, you're not much use. You're not getting anywhere. It's not going to take you anywhere. And Panama is one of those countries that is very future-oriented. They talk about what they're doing today and what they will be doing. I mean, this is a country that had not had a dictator. It was invaded by a foreign power. It had a very difficult period after that, getting itself reorganized. It did a very good job of it, but it wasn't easy. It was very difficult. In the early part of this decade, 2000, 2001, they had a very serious recession here. They've had all sorts of things they could talk about in their past, plenty of them. But that's not what they talk about. They talk about today and tomorrow. They're very much focused on the future. I like that. I appreciate that. And I can see that in the government's activities, whether it was one administration or another, one political party or another, it doesn't make any difference. It's a future orientation that's extremely important, and I find it among the population as a whole. Radically different than some countries I will leave unnamed, where it's exactly the opposite. Those other countries may be richer in some ways, but they're not going forward, moving backwards. Panama is moving forwards, and I really, really, really appreciate that. I wouldn't live here if that was not the case. I just have too much experience with the other kind of country. Oh yeah, the other kind of country may have cheap land or cheap housing, a really cheap cost of living because there isn't much to buy anyhow. But they're not going anywhere. They're an unhappy country. There are problems there. There are social problems, political problems, and people are blaming somebody. They're always looking for somebody to blame for their problems. The future-oriented countries really are just much more involved in trying to figure out what to do next. And they may argue a lot. This is a free country. It's a democratic society. There's constant debate going on about what to do next. But it's all about that future. What's the best way to move forward? That's one good reason to be in Panama. And it's one thing to keep in mind wherever you go, whether it's Panama or another country, you need to go to a country that is focused on the future. That country has a future, likely a much better one than the country where you sit and people just tell you how unfair life has been for them. You know something? I've discovered that it works exactly the same for individuals. So that's a little hint here too, for me as well as for you, that countries are nothing more than collections of human beings. And so they exhibit human behavior. If you and I, regardless of where you live or what I do or choose to do or whatever, it's not important. If you're looking to the future and you're building a future and you're interested in it, that's where your focus is, you're much likelier to make some real progress, to be happy, and to see improvements, a better life. If you're going to be buried back in, what it used to be like when you were younger, or when you had this job or that job, or some terrible, unfair thing that happened to you, it may be completely legitimate. It's not getting you anywhere. It's over. It's done. It's history. So each of us, just like each nation, makes his or her mind up. Are we focusing on the future? Are we looking forward? Or are we looking backward? As Marshall McLuhan, a commentator many years ago, put it, are we marching backwards into the future? Are we looking at the future through a rear-view mirror? Both of those comments he made sum it up very clearly as far as I'm concerned. So keep your eyes focused ahead, and wherever you go to live, look for a place where the people you are going to be living with are looking forward to a better life too. And if they are, you can find yours there as well. I happen to think Panama's a great place to do that, and it's working well for me. So if it works well for you, wonderful. But don't lose sight of that in the national life of the country you reach eventually, even if you stay at home, and in your own life.